Hello and welcome to the Non-Profits, the weekly recorded show that addresses current events and news items from an atheist and secular humanist perspective. Guess what? Summer is here. And Faye Albernas is out on Miami Beach for Pride. She is self-proclaimed very loud and fast talking and the lesbian host of the Faye What show. While out on Miami Beach, she talks about the struggles of the LGBTQ community in the current political landscape, especially in Florida. What is striking to me, though, is the contrast between her loud and colorful outfit and the topics that she discusses, like the funding of HIV and AIDS research and threats to trans kids. It's a strange combination. However, she seems to be genuinely interested in everyone's well-being, and honestly, we need more good-natured people in the world. This story is from LGBTQ Nation by Greg Owen on May 19th, 2025. So with that, though, within the article, it does say that she was out as part of her congregation. And I am immediately question, we see active persecution of trans people, as well as we did in the past and still ongoing, but less so, of gays and lesbians, at least it's just not as in much of the spotlight, from churches and religious establishments. How can an LGBT person be part of anything religious, a church? Isn't this counterproductive? Like, does that even make sense? Cynthia, why would they do that?
Well, I think that one of the things that we have to see in the article, it highlights this intersection between faith and the LGBTQIA plus identity, and how they use that identity through activism, especially through Albernas's, involvement as such. And with Unity on the Bay, the non-denominational church that she embraces, it supports LGBTQ people, even though at large, that's not a traditional position that religious institutions take. So even with her participation in the Miami Beach Pride, it actually underlines the importance of visibility and boldness in claiming her spiritual and also her social place. Even though I have no idea what spiritual means, but hey, if you like it, I love it, Albernas. I'm just saying. I mean, like, I'm just saying, but also like reading her story is really like a reminder that, faith and the LGBTQ identity are not necessarily mutually exclusive, despite this long-standing narrative that has sought to separate or oppose them. And I think that with her involvement with the Unity on the Bay reveals a hopeful path forward, that you can still be a church organization and still support a marginalized community, even though that is not necessarily the traditional stance that the church actually takes. Now, if you ask me personally, does that make sense? Is it reasonable?
I did ask you, Cynthia.
Yes, you did. You did ask me personally, Cynthia. That is my name. Last time I checked. Thank you for reminding me. I personally don't necessarily see how the two can meet, because for so long we've seen the church being actively opposed to the LGBTQIA plus community. And I know that I personally say, like, I don't understand like how one can be queer and also be a Christian. But I've met several people who happen to be part of that community that also have some type of religious or spiritual identity within that. They believe in a God. They go to a church. They practice, some type of ritual when it comes to, their belief systems within the church. And for some reason, they feel that it affirms them. So I think that even though, like, personally, I may not necessarily see how that's reasonable, because you do have scripture that supports the marginalization of especially gay people. But on the other end, I am pro what makes you feel good do. So There's
Sure.
that.
Because I apparently did not realize that I'm in a relatively unique perspective within the atheist community, that I was never religious. Most people have deconverted to some degree, and that was never the case for me. So therefore, I find it in many ways alien and baffling to really even try to have some of these discussions or ideas. So then that makes me say something like, "Hey, Eli, you brought this up in your notes, so I'm just going to use it. It's a great ammo. We're all cishet people. Can we even have a conversation about this because we're not part of the LGBT community? I'm an atheist who did not deconvert. I am a little alien within my own community. Are we even allowed to talk about this?"
And that's actually, for a moment, there was a brief moment where I thought it would just be you and I, Rob, on the show.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
So I was like, yeah.
Respect the tenure.
So at first I was like, oh, yes, I know people love hearing straight, cis, white dudes talk about the experience of anybody other than them, or even
thank goodness for me for actually committed to making this conversation not just about straight cishet white guys. Okay.
Well, and Cynthia, we joke all the time too that when you and I work together, you have when you're you have me discuss experiences that I haven't had and can't have. But to your point, Rob, to answer your question,
because it's fun, by the way. I'm just gonna say.
Right, and that's and I want to clarify too that like I'm grateful for that opportunity, because I have to learn when I'm presented with that, and it's one more instance of being presented with it. So I'm grateful for it. And to that point, I think that, I mean, everybody is entitled to an opinion on everything, I guess. I mean, to a certain extent, like I can think whatever I think about any given thing. Like if I'm wrong, anybody has the right to tell me like, no, you're wrong. And you sound like an asshole with how wrong you are, how confidently you are. So it's just sort of the way that it is. I think, do I need to be a part of a group to articulate an opinion on it? I would argue that no, but I personally strive to make sure that what I am saying is based on what I am hearing and learning from people who are living that experience and what they are telling me that experience is like, because I know it's not my place to speak for anybody else. I can only say this is what I'm being told, and that's why I care.
I think, to use an extreme example, because extremes are useful is in just trying to create some form of argumentation so we can understand whether something may be valid in the outset if we take it to an extreme position. I think I agree. Ultimately, everyone can have an opinion. That doesn't mean it's informed. But you can have an opinion and maybe even speak intelligibly on this situation. In this case, if you're not part of the group. For example, I'm not part of the KKK. And I could probably talk about how that's a bad thing, right? Like they suck. Yeah. I don't like them. And I don't need to be a part of them to go, I think the structure's a little bad.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for that, Rob.
Yeah,
appreciate
of course.
It.
I mean, I was going to go for Nazi, but at least I'm white. So that was the problem with that.
Yeah.
But you were talking about, we're talking about the marginalization of LGBT people, LGBTQ. And what I find from Faye Watt, especially, or Faye Albernas, is her outfits. And I know this is going to sound really silly, but I genuinely find a really symbolic, interesting contradiction and distinction about how loud she dresses compared to the severity of the things that she's talking about. So when we go to Pride events, I've only been to one, and even then, kind of. It is my understanding that Pride events are like really big parties. They're in large part a celebration. So how is it possible for a very large party to be an act of defiance? Because I see in your notes, Cynthia, that you started talking about just meeting at all is an act of defiance. I don't get it. Help me out.
Yeah, Pride events are not just a party. I mean, I have been fortunate to participate in a couple, especially within my work in the past. I specifically was a case manager that worked with, LGBTQI plus people. So when we had the opportunity to participate in Pride in my city, I was absolutely saying, yes, I will walk all those miles and get my feet hurting because I consider myself an ally, even though I may, identify as a cishet person, heterosexual, but I find myself, allied with the LGBTQIA plus community because there is an intersection with race and also gender identification there and also marginalization. So I get it, right? And I think that most of the opportunity that we see within a Pride event is visibility. And visibility is an act of defiance, because what we're seeing right now is an overt, active policies coming from the top down to marginalize specifically that group.
Yeah, they're not discreet.
No, they're not. They're not. They are overt with it, right?
Yeah.
And they are really trying to sweep under the rug that, gay people exist, trans people exist, intersex people exist, right? And you even have people within our community that we have looked up to for years to be like our thought leaders on atheism and reason and free thought, starting to devolve themselves within that conversation to marginalize even further and even weaponizing their so-called knowledge against trans people. We've covered this before. And so since people are saying, oh, well, you're an evolution biologist, so you should know what you're talking about. So yes, I'm going to take your word instead of like people who are actually living this life, right? So I think that it's important. It's kind of like how we, in African-American communities celebrate Juneteenth. A lot of people don't know what Juneteenth is. Juneteenth is when the Union Army went to Galveston, Texas, to let the last of the slaves know so they were free because of the Civil War. And ever since then, before it became a national holiday, that within the African-American community, Juneteenth was celebrated. It's June 19th. We consider that our Independence Day. But there has been like efforts to shut it down, not necessarily really acknowledge it, et cetera, et cetera. And we even also see like an overt attack on even talking about slavery, even in an academic sense.
Yeah.
And I would say that this is also what's happening with the LGBTQ people. You have, senators and representatives who actively speak against, same-sex marriage. And you also have, bills coming out of different states and even on the federal level to, not acknowledge that trans people exist and even trying to keep away proper medical care for trans affirming people.
Yeah, you're bringing up like really good examples of marginalization of many different types of people, and it just kind of seems like trans people are the target nowadays. I don't want to call it the fad, but it's definitely the thing that's happening.
They are, and I mean, and I don't think that, and so if we give a chance to have like events like Pride to say that, hey, this is who I am, this is who I was born this way. Shout out to Lady Gaga. In order for us to, really say that this is a thing, then, I think that that's going to be the defiance against the ones who want to erase their identity.
So then, short question, Eli, I think we might be using the word marginalized differently in the way that we're talking internally. And I just want to first ask, what is marginalization? Does that require an act of aggression against that group? Or is it simply, you are the minority?
Yeah, it's simply, and I think you're right. I think not quite what you said, but related to what you said, I think there's just a misunderstanding about what it what marginalization is. It's when you think about like the paper that you would write on when you were in high school. Sure. The whole body, everything that you would write was in between those two lines. And on the outside of those lines, the margins, the things that you only use for the 3-hole punch to put it in your binder. Yeah. That's the concept of marginalized groups is that the group that perceives themselves as a majority, typically, at least in the United States, cis-het white men, sure. Christian primarily, but I mean, I guess not all anymore, but see themselves as the body of the paper, the body of the homework. And then the margins outside of those two lines, that's what's left for everybody else to exist in. And it's intended to be separate from us.
Well, so that's my question. It's intended. Does marginalization exist simply because there are groups that are smaller than others, or does it require malice?
If it's possible, can I answer that?
Yeah, please.
Okay. I think that what we have to understand specifically when it comes to like marginalization is that it comes more because it's not necessarily because you're the minority. Okay. It's because the people that are in power decide that they're going to create policies to keep you existing in a certain area, and you cannot exist outside of that. And okay. And it comes, and I know that we can see that specifically when it comes to the laws of the land that is, created specifically for a specific group on how we are going to govern you. A perfect example I can think of is Jim Crow. Yeah, during those 100 years in the South, you had Jim Crow laws that govern how Black people are supposed to move, where they're supposed to live, what bathrooms they can use, what sinks they can use, what lunch counters that they can eat at, et cetera, right? And now we're seeing the same thing with trans people saying, oh, well, I know that you identify as a woman, but, within this particular state, you can't use the woman's bathroom, even though you identify as such. You can't get, your hormone treatment when you're a certain age. You can't get this covered under your insurance because the government said so. And that's specifically what we are experiencing when it comes to like the laws that are created in order for the people to be governed in this area. Now to your point about malice,
yeah. The way that you're talking about it, the way that makes me start thinking is that malice does not require just power, because it is how it is affecting people. It doesn't necessarily need to be malicious, but something has to be enacted.
Well, I think that one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that if malice is intended or not, the people in power, when they put these particular rules upon a group, maliciousness still happens. Saying like back in the day, during before the United States became the United States, and you had these slew of laws coming down for the Virginia Burgess government in that area, they decided, because of Bacon's Rebellion, and you had Africans that actually sided with white indentures, that we're going to create a system where we're going to separate the two of these people in order for them not to hook up again, in order to overthrow the people who happen to be elite. Now, their thing was, we just want to protect ourselves and our interests. But what they ended up doing was creating an entire labor force that was like based on chattel slavery, that actually ended up bleeding into the United States and even in the United States Constitution. And even though they were saying, no, we're just protecting our interests because we don't want to, have anything come against like, our, capitalistic desires.
It's nothing against you personally. It's just the effect of what we've done. Therefore, like malice, I would say, requires intent, but in this case, malicious or not, the damage is done. Exactly. So, but you're talking about how people are governed and maintained, how power structures are set over them. And this is, and Faye Albernas is in Pride at Miami. So, Eli, do you think there's anything special about Pride specifically in Florida?
I think it kind of to what Cynthia was saying earlier about calling it sort of an act of defiance.
Okay.
And I think I sort of understood at least a version of what you meant right away by that, Cynthia, is that it with the recent and across the country, there's recent, increased recent, I guess, hate, we could call it, towards LGBTQ people. I feel like in the past, like, decade or so, maybe there's been some improvement to the public image or the public acceptance of at least gay and lesbian people, if not trans people. And somebody who has lived that experience might correct me, and I hope that they do if I'm wrong. But recently, in the past, I'd say year and a half to 2 years, that it's just sort of swung back in the other direction. And it's, I think perhaps it was said in this article, but it's not safe for trans people, especially trans kids. And
especially in a place run by DeSantis.
Exactly. Yeah. And I wanted to avoid using anyone's name, but like especially in Florida, with the, I guess, sort of the leanings of the people that are in power there and their views and how they view gay and trans people and groups that are already marginalized. It's I think the fact that Faye Watt is, making a public statement saying like, hey, remember that we are not alone. I'm sure it can feel very isolating when everything you're hearing in the news is just anti-you rhetoric. Like everything is about how like you need to be cured or you're bad or broken or whatever it is. For someone to like have a loud reminder, even like, hey, you're not alone. You're not bad. You're not broken. Let's unite. You belong here. We want you here. I think that's, good on her, I think. For those that need it.
Incredible message from her, because she is so open and welcoming, even just the little bit that I have seen from her as well. And you, viewer, are also not alone. Stay with us and click the doobly-doo down below to see more nonprofits.